wants to hear a story? Because I have one hell of a story to share with you. I told a few of you that I chatted with earlier that I have lived this and I can't even believe it. My name is Rick Bucher, and I spent 27 years in Scottsdale, Arizona as a firefighter paramedic. I was also a technical rescue technician. If you don't know what that is, technical rescue is everything that a normal fire truck pulls up to and goes, I don't know. I don't know what to do. This is a flooded wash with swift water in it. This is a trench collapse at a construction site. This is a worker up on a power line tower. This is mountain rescue. It's all that stuff. And I worked in that role for the majority of my career. Technical rescue is typically something that a firefighter will get into 5-10 years into their career once they've gone through their probationary period. They've done rotations on different trucks, and then they go through usually a seniority-based testing process to make the technical rescue team. When I started with the fire department in '93, I was already a rock climber, a backpacker, an outdoorsman, and they knew that. When I finished first in my academy, they sent me to the technical rescue station. So my first day with technical rescue was as a probationary firefighter. That is completely unfair in multiple ways. I jumped the seniority line, but in technical rescue, what you have is a situation where the manpower with the experience at it, the people that are the best at it, do nothing but get better at it. And what I mean by that is when our engine company, some years we were in a ladder. I did this 27 years. We had all different kind of apparatus. The engine company would pull up, and we have somebody that's in a real hairy situation, and my company officer had a choice. Who's he going to send in? Well, number one, I started out as an EMT, so my medic partners were getting sent to do all the fun stuff all the time. So I looked at that and thought, well, I'm going to medic school. As soon as I got out of medic school, because I had some experience, I started being the one to get sent in by my company officer to do things. If it was a situation where only one rescuer could do it, and I'll give you some examples. A rescuer-based evolution where someone was stuck on the side of a cliff and we needed to rappel down to pick the person off of the cliff, I would go do that by myself. A patient fell off their mountain bike, they've got a head injury, and they're 7 miles back on a single track trail that is 1,000 feet in elevation up the mountain. We're going to use a helicopter, but it's 100 degrees out and the helicopter has a limited amount of lift. This is about what I weighed throughout my whole career. So they send the lightest guy with the least amount of equipment. I'd fly in, they would lower me on a hoist, and I would evaluate the patient, treat them, evacuate them up to the helicopter, and then if they had enough fuel after they dropped the patient off, they'd come pick me up. If they didn't, well, I was glad I had a Camelback on with some water because I was hiking out. And that happened plenty of times. Bobby mentioned the number 16,000. Just for the heck of it, after I retired, I sat down and I wanted to know like what kind of call volume I did. So I figured it out, and it was in excess of 16,000 calls for service. Those were not all in the helicopter. Those were picking people up off the floor. I worked in Scottsdale. Those were taken snakes out of people's backyards. I've handled rattlesnakes and bull snakes by the hundreds, probably thousands. My point is, I did plenty of non-emergency calls, okay? But during my time in, because I did technical rescue basically the whole time I was in, I got exposed to all the normal stuff, all the fire, all the EMS, and all the technical rescue. On September 11th of 2019, I found myself in my backyard with my Remington 870 shotgun between my feet, and I was trying to get the angle right so that I wouldn't just take off the front of my face. And then I was trying to decide if I wanted to take out my brainstem or shoot myself in the chest. How I got there and what happened after is the story. That 16,000 calls didn't help. But the way I grew up set the stage for this whole thing. We all have traumatic experiences in our lives. I alluded to being adopted when I was 4 days old. I had a decent childhood, upper middle class. Grew up playing golf, if that tells you what kind of neighborhood I grew up in Fort Worth. I made first chair all city band on the alto saxophone in middle school. I played football, soccer, baseball, and basketball, and played in the band. I had a sister who was 9 months younger than me, born naturally to my adoptive parents. So I found myself immediately in competition. And what I was competing for as a kid was their attention. But I always felt kind of like a fifth wheel. Like I felt like I just didn't really belong. The first fire kind of experience that I had was my family was driving home. I was probably about 10, 11 years old. And there's a smoke column off in the distance. Fire truck comes up, code 3 behind us. We pull over and then get going again. And the fire truck is taking all of the turns to get to Oak Hollow Lane where our house was. Our back shed was on fire. So I get to watch them pull line, put out a shed fire, and like, oh wow, okay, that's something else. I've got a picture of me sitting in the driver's seat of a Fort Worth, Texas fire engine that didn't have a top. It was a convertible. Like I mean, when you think open cab, this was open cab, right? I watched Emergency religiously. Johnny and Roy were my heroes. Maybe that would be a good answer to that question. Who's your hero? Johnny and Roy were those guys. Let's pause for a second. Who else runs a hazmat, a technical rescue, brings a code back to life, and puts out a fire in the same shift every single day? Those guys that was amazing. So we moved. The family moved to Scottsdale, Arizona in '87, in the middle of my freshman year of high school. That was rough. Lose all your friends, and then you are thrust into this group that you don't know. They don't know you, but they do give you a nickname based on your accent. And my nickname in high school was Tex. I had a thick drawl that eventually disappeared to the point where this is This is about how I've spoken for most of my life. So that brings us to the fire service. I was spinning wrenches in a bicycle shop, going to community college for a degree that I did not want. One of the guys that worked part-time at that bike shop was a Phoenix firefighter. And he said, hey, anybody that wants to come do a ride along sometime, come on over. Well, I was the only one that took him up on it. And as you've probably heard, rider's curse being what it is, nothing happened. So we go through the first half of the day, do some training, make dinner, we're wrapping up the dishes, tones drop, working fire. So we all run out to the bay. Before I even understand what's happening, we're on the wrong side of the road going down Thunderbird in Phoenix. And my buddy Hugh, that I worked in the bike shop with, is getting his gear on, and his partner's doing the same. We pull into this cul-de-sac. There's black smoke pumping out of the front door of a model home that's on fire. They pull line, disappear into the darkness. That black smoke turns gray, white as they get water on the fire, and they come out, they're covered in insulation, they're high-fiving, and I'm looking at this with my 19 years at the time, thinking, I think I just found it. I think I just found what I want to do. So I walked in the local fire station. I said, are there any jobs here? And they said, well, are you an EMT? Nope. Okay, go get your EMT cert. So went to the community college, got my EMT cert, went back. Hey, are there any jobs here? I got my cert. We're good, right? Have you taken any fire science classes? Nope. Back to community college. I take fire hydraulics. That was my first of all the classes to take. The third time I went back to that fire station and said, are there any jobs here? The captain that was on duty that day said, yes, there are. I'm hiring reserves. That was how I started in the fire service. So fast forward to that night in 2019 in September. I set that shotgun down and I thought, I don't want them to find me like this. Because a lot of you sitting in front of me have seen that. I've seen it. So set that gun down and I made a phone call. I called something called Fire Strong, and that's administered by the Phoenix Fire Department. And I proceeded to lie to the lady on the other end of the phone when I described how I was feeling, and she asked me, are you thinking of hurting yourself? No, nothing like that. I'm all right. I think I'm going to be okay. Well, put the gun back where I store it, and I went to bed for the night, but I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I ruminated on everything that was happening in my life, all the bad things that were happening, all the bad outcomes of the calls that I had run. Forget about code saves and ROSC and having somebody walk out of the hospital a week after you perform ACLS on them and bring them back to life. Forget all the wins. The losses were what I ruminated on, and just, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I spent about the last 3 years of my career hoping that the tones and the lights never went off again. If I had never run another call, I would have been perfectly fine. I laid in a twin bed in my station with the covers pulled up over my head so that when the lights came on, they wouldn't make me jump. And when the tones went off, it would mute the sound a little bit so I could just not be like that cartoon cat stuck to the ceiling, you know, when the tones went off. That night, on the 11th, ended in the morning with a plan. That morning, I got my girlfriend off to work like I always did, made her coffee, put her lunch together. And when I saw her car disappear around the corner at the end of the cul-de-sac, I got in my truck and I drove to my fire station. And I was off duty. And I thought, if the engine is there, I'll keep driving. It's about 10 in the morning and they were gone. So I pulled around back. I walked through the day room. The news was on. Cups of coffee were sitting on the day room table where the guys had left them when they got the call that they were on. I walked down the long hallway back to where we stored our event equipment, our standby equipment. And in that standby equipment were complete narcotics pouches. I unloaded 6 narcotics pouches, an IV setup, and a couple giant syringes into my backpack. And then I went and checked into a luxury hotel down the street. I left a note on the door inside that said, "Attention maids, do not enter, call police." I put my ID and my phone on the desk, and I wrote my girlfriend's name and phone number on a note right there. And then I proceeded to draw up 120 milligrams of morphine, 50 milligrams of Versed, and another 50 milligrams of Ativan. I made a lethal injection. I took the lampshade off of the lamp in the corner and I put that next to the bed. That was my IV pole. It takes a while to draw up that many vials of meds. It's probably 30 minutes. I had plenty of time to think. But what I didn't think about was the consequences of my action. I told Lynn that at some point during my career, I was going to call her and say, "I just want to hear your voice." She and I had been together about 4 years at that point, and I had called her a few times. Once after a pediatric drowning, once after an opiate overdose that didn't go well. And I instructed her, "Look, just tell me what you had for lunch or what you're going to do after work. Doesn't matter. Just talk to me." And that was kind of a grounding exercise. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that I was grounding myself, but that's what I was doing. I actually called her while I was drawing up those meds on the 12th. And I said, hey, I just wanted to hear your voice. And she said, are you at work? I said, no, I'm not. And she said, well, where are you? I said, I'm all right, don't worry about it. I just wanted to hear your voice. Okay, well, are you all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Told her I loved her, hung up the phone. I put an 18 gauge in my left AC, popped the tourniquet, had the line plugged in, and I had those two big old 60cc syringes full of solution to my problem. I pinched off the tubing and I pushed it all. Lynn was a school nurse at the time, and at her school was a school resource officer from PD. We called him Barney. Sorry. She went to Barney and she said, hey, something's wrong with Rick. We need to find him. Because I didn't answer when she called me back. Barney said, okay, we'll ping his phone. So he calls dispatch. And then about a minute later, he asks Lynn, where would he be if he was around Scottsdale Road in Lincoln? And she said, he'd be at the Andaz Resort. And he asked her, well, how do you know that? And she said, that's where I took him for a staycation 4 days ago for his birthday. That was a great birthday. And I went there because that was a place that was peaceful, that I had a good experience and good memory of. And I thought, that's about as good a place as any. Police officers in Scottsdale carry intranasal Narcan. Near as we can tell, they showed up probably 2 minutes before I would have taken my last breath. One of my biggest regrets is who else showed up. And that was the crew on engine 603, my truck, from the other shift. But damn, I'm good and glad they showed up. Because they saved my life. Two PD officers push all their intranasal Narcan. Engine 603 pushed 2 drug boxes full of Narcan. They transported me code 3 down Scottsdale Road, and they actually called a station that was along the way between us and the hospital and met them in the intersection, threw a drug box in, kept going. I got a 3rd drug box full of Narcan. And they're bagging me. That they couldn't treat that Ativan. I had a benzo. It was like the ace up my sleeve. I was in an induced coma for 3 days. And they were trying to get me to breathe on my own and extubate me, but it wasn't working. So on the 3rd day, it did work. And for the 3rd time in my life, I woke up in an ICU after being unconscious. I've been banged up a lot. First thing I saw was a clock on the wall. And I thought, that didn't work. For those that don't know, that's roughly 10 times what it would take to kill somebody. It's a lot of meds. The next thing I remember doing and seeing was looking to my right and seeing Lynn sitting right there by my side. And I felt immediate regret. I didn't understand what was going on with me at the time, but I knew something bad was wrong. I knew that that guy that made first chair on alto sax as a kid was not there anymore. I knew that the guy that won more bicycle road races than he could remember over 30 years of racing was not there anymore. Rock climbing, kayaking, motorcycle racing, teaching technical rescue to the Regional Training Consortium, backpacking the John Muir Trail, all these incredible things that I've done with my life didn't mean anything. Those things that brought me joy were gone, and I didn't understand why. Somehow, miraculously, I can still do math, I can spell, I can remember things. I walked away from that incident with no deficits other than the trauma that I caused myself and the trauma that I caused to the people that love me. And to people I didn't even know. When something like that happens in our community, that hurts all of us. A couple days later, a buddy of mine from the union walked in and he said, "There's a place in Maryland called the IAFF Center of Excellence. Are you interested in going there?" And I said, "Yeah. Can we go now? By the way, what is it?" It sounded like inpatient treatment, and it sounded like help. And we did some research, and it looked like a good place for me to be. Brad flew across the country with me, and 7 days after I killed myself, and I say I killed myself instead of saying I attempted suicide, because I pushed those syringes, man. It was over. But for grace or luck or something, we flew to Maryland, and I checked into the IFF Center of Excellence for inpatient treatment, and they provide inpatient treatment for mental health and substance abuse for firefighters and paramedics who are part of the IFF union. Two days after I got there, my pulse ox was 84, and I had bilateral chest pain that I couldn't get away from. I didn't have one pulmonary embolism, I had two after a 4-hour plane ride and after a 7-day stay in the ICU. So for the second time in just over a week, my life was in peril. But this time, I was dealing with it alone. I was in a... If you had shown me a map of the US with none of the names on it, I couldn't have pointed to Maryland. I'm in a hospital I'd never heard of. I don't have any support with me. So I went through that experience alone. Lovenox injections in my abdomen that burn like hell, and I was on blood thinners for 6 months after that. They bring me back to the center a couple days later, and the staff was honestly surprised that I was still alive. By this time, I was probably down 15, 20 pounds from what I am now. I didn't have the weight to lose. I was gaunt. I looked like Walking Dead. And that's where the journey of recovery started. I sat down with the medical director there, the psychiatrist, Dr. Abby Morris, and within 30 minutes, she had diagnosed me with severe anxiety, major depressive disorder, and complex PTSD. And do you think I believed the diagnosis? Being seniority based, when you're riding around on a TRT company like mine, we had in excess of 90 years of experience between 4 crew members. Pardon my language, we were assholes. And here's why. 2 events in the fire service make people ask, what did they do, more than any others. One is Firefighter of the Year. What did they do? We pulled a guy out like a week ago and he survived. This guy did community outreach and you gave the prize to him? Funny aside, I actually did the Heimlich maneuver in a bar and cleared an airway off duty, and I thought, this might be it. Nope, not a chance. The other thing that makes crews ask the same question is a firefighter retirement due to PTSD. What did they do? It's that same brand of comparison. We pulled a guy out, but in a different tone. We pulled a guy out of a fire, and I basically tore his arms off, dragging him. I don't have PTSD. What's this guy doing? There exists a stigma so strong within our community of fire and EMS, but also in our society, involved with stepping forward and asking for help and saying, hey, I don't know what it is, but I don't feel right. And I can't stop dreaming about this. And when I see or smell that, stepping forward for help. There's also a stigma involved with admitting that you've been diagnosed with something like PTSD, anxiety, depression. It can feel humiliating. It can feel embarrassing. It can feel demeaning. It can drive you to sit in your backyard and contemplate something. It took about a week or two, but as I underwent the equivalent of 5 years of therapy, over the course of 45 days. I learned what PTSD is. I learned the signs, I learned the symptoms, and I learned that I checked damn near every box. I isolated myself socially. Mine disguised itself as success. For almost 30 years, I would spend 20 hours a week training on my road bike or my mountain bike. That is essentially a professional level training program, and that's what I modeled it after. And with it came success. I crossed the finish line with my arms in the air a lot. What I was really successful at was isolating myself for 20 hours a week with the training. Rumination was another one. I would play calls and experiences over and over and over in my head again. But then it started to expand out of that. And there were just things in life, like somebody would cut me off in traffic and I couldn't let it go. I was thinking about that event that happened in the morning at dinner. I avoided sights, sounds, and smells that reminded me of those worst calls that I ran. Sewer gas was the worst one for me. That one was because we showed up and had 2 workers 24 feet underground in a sewer grease trap who were viable when we showed up, but then either succumbed to hydrogen sulfide gas or drowned in what they were engulfed in while we were getting our con space gear ready. Another one was a World War I 2-seat biplane that crashed, the father and son in it, and they were burnt beyond recognition. And once we were done putting out a couple acres of brush fire, we got to do a body recovery ×2. There's something very special about living in the city that you protect. When I was driving, or even when I was in the captain's seat, all I needed to hear was the address and I knew exactly where to go. Yeah, I got it. No need to navigate. I know that one. But in the morning, after my shift, I was driving through the intersection where that rollover was, where somehow the patient wound up under the car. And those freaking gouges in the pavement were there until they repaved it like 5 or 6 years later. We had a freeway that ran through our first due, and same thing, those damn gouges in the, every time I drive southbound on the 101, I'd see them. And I could see another upside down car with a young couple in it and the bald tires in the rainstorm. But then I could also see the sport bike that came flying by our scene and rear-ended another car while we were working. Scottsdale is so full of ghosts that I'm not sure I ever want to go back there. So when you live in the city that you protect, you're faced with that on a daily basis. And there is no avoiding the sights, sounds, and smells, because they're all right there. I used pain meds and alcohol off and on throughout my career because I got banged up so much I had to make the back pain go away after breaking my back in a rock climbing fall. And then I had to make the broken neck and femur and ankle from a motorcycle accident pain go away. So I would visit a lady by the name of Vivian when I got home from work. And Vivian was Vicodin and Vino. And I'd pop open a bottle of red and wash down 10 or 20 milligrams of Vicodin. When I was at the center, I realized, yeah, this is real, and I've got it. One of the hardest phone calls that I've ever had to make was to my fire chief, Tom Shannon, to say, Chief, I don't think I can work for you anymore. But some of the most supportive words I've ever heard in my life came from his end of the line when he said, brother, I will support you no matter what your decision is. That did a lot for me. That made me feel like everything was going to be okay. Even though I knew it wasn't. Guys that retire after a 20, 25, 30-year career and know that their retirement date is coming have a hard time transitioning to civilian life. I had to do it after this traumatic event that I inflicted upon myself with no planning. I returned home from the center and I started treatment with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I got prescribed a pretty mild medicine regimen. I went through EMDR therapy. And I worked my ass off. And I say that because EMDR is hard work. It's what worked for me. It involves reliving your trauma and re-experiencing it in a controlled way and reframing the way you think about that call or that event in your life. I actually don't know how many calls I processed. It was a lot. It took a couple years. But I recovered. I think that's the point of this. I recovered and I've survived. I think the key to mental health in the fire service and in public safety in general is not a disability retirement for people. I'm 50. I would rather be climbing on the truck and running calls right now. You think I didn't live some of the best days of my life flying in Firebird 10 and making treatment and evacuation decisions and no bullshit, saving people's lives? I love being here with you people, but I would rather be doing that. I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell you about something called the Triple Crown. And in 27 years this happened 2 times, 2 shifts. We had a working fire and made an interior fire attack. We had a code save with pulses and a blood pressure when we got back to the ER and did a technical rescue. We were Johnny and Roy. And I got to do it twice in 27 years. Amazing times that I don't regret. There is no more noble pursuit or noble profession than saving and protecting lives and property. I don't think there's anything better you can do. Sometime after I got home, I decided it was time to do a DNA test. Because over the years, bike racing and going to different towns, I had always looked for a Margaret Batura in the phone book, because that was the name on my birth certificate. I found a couple Baturas here and there, but none of them had ever heard of Margaret. So send that DNA test in, and it came back with a 50% DNA match for my mom. So she had a profile on ancestry.com with a location and all that. And I was in Scottsdale, Arizona, suburb, but really a city of its own to the east of Phoenix. Her location came up as Chandler, Arizona, and that's 25 minutes south. I was born in Effingham, Illinois, and she had lived at various times in Seattle, Washington, in South Carolina, in Houston, in Florida, Chandler. So I reached out to her, and we went to lunch, met for the first time. And for the first time, I sat across the table from a blood relative. I had questions that were 47 years old at the time. Who am I? Where did I come from? Who are you? Before we met, we talked on the phone, and there was this vetting process that happened. Like, are you who you say you are, and what do you want? What's going on here? She told me that she rode Harley Davidson motorcycles in the 80s. Was one of the first women to ride a Harley on her own, and had led something called the Liberty Ride into Washington, D.C. when they were renovating the Statue of Liberty. And the thing that really sealed it for me was when she told me that her father, my grandfather, had won the Colorado State Road Racing Championship on a bicycle as a junior. You feel that? I still get it. She went on to tell me about the 6 siblings that I didn't know I had. Unfortunately, how they lost my closest sister in a plane crash in the 80s. But she went on to tell me about Marty and Catherine and Mike and Pete and Julie and where they lived and what they did. And I've met every single one of them in person since. And they're all amazing. There isn't a one in the bunch that I don't like. If I had succeeded on September 12th of 2019, none of that would have happened. But you couldn't have told me that when I did it. But now, afterwards, after recovery and recovering, I can see what I nearly lost with an unrivaled clarity. I have had a remarkable life. I have done amazing things. I've made a lot of mistakes. A lot of people along the way told me, Booker, you need to write a book. This is amazing. You got to put it down. And I never thought to. But when I checked into the IFF Center of Excellence, they handed me a composition book and a pen. I said, what is this for? And they said, you should start journaling. So I thought about where to start and what to say. And the first thing that I wrote was, in 1993, I walked into my local fire station and asked, are there any jobs here? And that was the start to that book. I hand wrote the first few chapters. And then I struggled to commit the rest of it to my computer over the next 3 years. Had a really bad technical rescue one night. We lost 6 Boy Scouts in a flooded wash. We saved 3, but we lost 3. Partner of mine, Steve Angulo, was on that call with us, and he killed himself a couple years after. It's a kind of famous fire in Scottsdale called the Fisher Fire, and he thought to burn his house down with his family inside. My friend Craig Chenery was on that call with me, and he killed himself about 6 years ago. And then last week I learned that one of the friends that I had met at the center in Maryland, who worked for Bangor, Maine Fire, took his own life. I knew that something had to be done, and I knew that I had the time and resources and desire and motivation and voice to try and make a difference. So I wrote Flame and Fortune, How the Fire Service Almost Killed Me. And it chronicles how I grew up. It takes you on a long ride along on a lot of different calls. but it tells you what happened after I got out of the fire service. I'd like to think that my story can influence firefighters in big departments who have a robust EAP, peer counseling, psychiatrists, psychologists on staff to use those resources and smash the stigma involved with stepping forward. And I hope that my story can help fire boards, town councils, mayors, elected officials to make the decision to spend some money on public safety mental health. And it takes horsepower like what I have sitting in front of me to normalize this, to eliminate the stigma involved, and to make stepping forward for help with a mental health issue non-punitive. What's the worst thing you can do to a cop or a firefighter? Tell them they can't be a cop or a firefighter. And that's something even as simple as a light duty assignment. These things have to be handled correctly so that they don't cause more trauma on top of what these people are already experiencing. If you get one thing out of this talk, I would like for it to be an understanding that we can take better care of each other. We can support each other better. We can normalize mental health care instead of having a stigma surrounding it. And know that there's hope afterwards. Thank you all for listening to my story.